Well, good morning. Welcome to staff meeting, January 20. Tom, take it away.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Commission. We have 3 items today. They're all a little bit lengthy. And the Commission has a pretty hard stop at about 11:20 to get to the Interest Bank Arena Founders Luncheon. So we'll try to keep this moving. We have a review from IMA today, which is our insurance consultant. And I'll let Sheena introduce them in just a second. Dr. Guo is supposed to be here. I think Lindsay's setting that up now to talk about the sales tax formula document that we sent out to you all last week and just kind of publicly talk about what our options are there. And then thirdly, I know Commissioner Howell and Tanya have worked over the weekend on the on the property tax cap legislation that we're going to spend 10 or 15 minutes on at the end of the meeting. So a lot to cover. We'll try to keep it moving. So Sheena, you're up first.
All right. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Sheena Schmetz, Chief Human Resources Officer. As Tom mentioned, we're here with our consultant IMA today to go over our health and wellness benefits. I would also like a moment to recognize our benefits team, which is sitting in the front row right behind you. We have Cheryl Orm, Ayana Frierson, and Sarah Meek. And those ladies keep the day-to-day going in regards to all of our benefits, and they answer lots and lots of questions. Vanessa is going to step up here in just a moment and introduce her team. But our goal is to keep affordable healthcare for our employees. We talk about this every year. We know costs are rising. So part of our presentation today is to really show you how we strategize for what our benefits are going to be, what trends we look for, and we know that those have been going up, and then what mitigation strategies we have in place. And so with our time frame today, we're going to jump right into this. We also have Katie Ertz, who is online with us as part of IMA. But Vanessa Keith is going to do our presentation, and with her today is also Diane Thornton with IMA. So Vanessa, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, I'm Vanessa Keith with IMA. Nice to see you all today. We get to talk about a really important topic, insurance. Very fun. Just to introduce my team, if you go to page 2, we've got Diane Thornton in the room with us today. She is our relationship manager. Just make sure the relationship is strong with the county and that our service team is meeting all expectations. I'm the account executive, so I'm the lead strategist on the account. We've got Jill Cooper, who's the account manager. She's the service day-to-day and communications manager. And then Katie Ertz is joining us virtually, and she is our technical analyst. So any data that we present today, she will actually go over. She's put that together. Page 3. So as Sheena had mentioned, we look at strategic planning on a near side basis. So we look at this year, but we also look at long-term opportunities for success. What you'll see on page 3 is 2025 implemented strategies, 2026, looking at what we're considering for 2027, and then 2027 and beyond. So in 2025, just to give a historical look, we did renew with United Healthcare after a third-party administrator and pharmacy benefit manager RFP. That contract is a 3-year contract with an option for year 4 and 5. We added weight loss medications to the benefit. There is coverage for mental health down to $20, whereas it was $50 before on the non-qualified high deductible health plans. We added in virtual behavioral health. We're trying to take away all barriers to that mental health benefit for employees. And then we added Maven maternity management program as well. For 2026, what we're trying to do is effectively control costs and benefits that we added, like weight loss. We also are recommending an employee survey. We call it the Voice of the Employee Survey, and it's really an opportunity for the county to get a better understanding of what benefits the employees actually value to make informed investments on your benefit package. From a medical perspective, we did add weight loss medication coverage for 2025. We are considering moving that to a coinsurance benefit. So instead of just paying a copay, have a little more skin in the game. Paying coinsurance is going to be a percentage of the cost. We did see a pretty big spike in utilization, and we just want to control that utilization long term. We are considering adding Surest as a benefit. It is a transparency and cost management tool, and I will go through that whenever we look at our potential strategies for next year. And then we are evaluating a coaching element to those weight loss medications. So if someone is on that weight loss medication, they will interact with the coach on a monthly basis. That ensures they're focusing on the other effective ways to lose weight, meaning diet and exercise. And then for 2027 and beyond, in 2026, we also evaluated international sourcing on prescription drugs. I'll go into that as well. For 2027 and beyond, we are potentially going to implement Surest in 2027. That's the goal. I will go through Surest in a later slide. We will look at plan design with that addition to a Surest plan. And then we will implement at some point a weight loss management program through coaching. And then finally, we will market the PBM, the pharmacy benefit manager relationship, at the end of that 3-year guarantee in 2028. I didn't read the whole thing to you, but those are the highlights. The county is on a self-funded health plan. What that means in a very direct way is the county is paying for claims on their health plan. There is what you call stop loss, which is insurance on top of those claims to stop liability at $500,000 on every individual in the plan. That's important because that's why data is important. And we'll go into that data. Katie, I'll turn it over to you if you'll introduce yourself and then go through the next couple pages of utilization.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Ertz. I'm the technical analyst for the county, and I will be going over the analytical slides. So looking at page 6, this is a total cost summary. So we wanted to break down those 3 main components, as Vanessa was mentioning, the highlights of a self-funded plan. You have your administration fees and your stop loss fees are those fixed components. So your admin is going to be what you're paying to UHC to be able to use their network, use their providers. That, as you can see, is pretty low when we're looking at an $18,000 total through October. That's a 2025 year-to-date total. And the reason why that is so low, or the 73 cents PEPM, is because right now you have your PBM carved into UHC. So it's a bundled arrangement. So UHC manages the PBM, the RX pharmacy manager, as well as the medical piece. So because of that, they give you a discount on your admin piece. As Vanessa mentioned in the strategy, looking forward into 2028, that's something that we might consider a change going forward if it's a right fit. But currently, and when we looked at it previously, it made more sense to remain it bundled and get that significant discount on your admin piece. In the middle section, you have your stop loss fees. So that's your one other component of fixed costs. And as Vanessa mentioned, this is for your large claimants. So stop loss premium is paid on a monthly basis. And that provides coverage for any large claimant over $500,000 that happens on your plan. So if you have anyone as an individual exceed that amount, then stop loss coverage kicks in and they cover that entire liability above $500,000. So again, a very important piece to maintain your risk and lower that risk going forward. So that is a $1 million cost year to date through October, a $43 per member per month cost at the bottom. And then moving over to the right, the next major component is obviously your claims. So this is looking at net claims. We backed out the RX rebates. So you also do get rebates back from the PBM. If you have, certain drugs mix will allow the manufacturers to give rebates back. So you do receive that on a quarterly basis. So we net that out from the claims and then also stop loss reimbursement. So if you did have anyone over that $500,000, say a $50,000 reimbursement, or someone at $550,000, we would reimburse that back as well. So your net claims are $33.2 million through October, so 1,300 BPM.
Katie, I'd like to highlight one thing.
Yes.
At the bottom of the slide, you can see estimated UHC admin fees if we carved out PBM, meaning we find a new pharmacy partner. Those fees would have been through October $1.1 million. That's in comparison to the $18,000 the county actually paid. And so if we do make changes like moving to a new pharmacy benefit manager in the future, we will have to consider that increase in costs in admin fees.
All right, moving on to page 7. This is a look at your total monthly cost summary. So this is all plans combined, and then the subsequent pages will be breaking out by plan. We wanted to focus on the 3 main areas. So the enrollment, to give you your perspective of how much people are enrolled, your total fixed costs. Again, that's going to be your breakout of your admin and stop loss like we covered on that prior slide. And then your total net claims. You can see that number matches the previous slide at 33 million. The average
Mr. Beatty's
enrollment.
got a quick question, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Yes.
What is this 96.8% expected claim loss ratio? Can you explain that so we have some context to what that is?
Absolutely.
Yes. So that is your expected claims are put forth by stop loss or our projection. So we can come up with an expected claim number and then compare your claims to that on a monthly basis. So 96%, you're probably thinking that looks a little high or maybe bad. And some of that is the RX spend. It definitely has been an increase and especially weight loss drugs have increased quite a bit this year. But I do want to mention that you are self-funded. So if you are way under that expected loss ratio, that's just money that you're not budgeting correctly is the way, to look at it. So, but that is that 96% loss ratio is the expected claims ratio. And we'll show that on the subsequent pages as well for each plan.
I think I understand. It's 100% budget or a 0% budget?
Right. So 100%
budgets
would be
or under budget. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
all right. We will proceed to page 8. So you can see that expected claims ratio changed quite a bit when we were looking at just one plan. This is the premier plan listed at the top in the title. And the reason for that is likely due to the population in this and plan is your high utilizer. So they are utilizing the plan quite a bit. So you have an average of 866 employees enrolled or 2,000 members in this plan. But your gross claims are quite significant. And when you split up just an average per member per cost, like how much you're supposed to be budgeting and how much is expected for this plan, your loss ratio is well over that 100% because this plan has a higher utilization occurring on it. Because it also is the most rich plan, so you tend to have your higher utilizers navigate towards that plan.
Having your highest utilizers on your richest plan is not atypical. It's very typical to have those high utilizers know they're going to use their benefits. So they want a lower deductible and a lower out of pocket. So having a higher utilization rate on your richest option is pretty typical. 154% is representative of a lot more claims than we saw in the previous year. And Katie will go through that as well.
Yes. So the next page we are looking at on page 9, this is the plan performance. So your base plan. So your base plan has the highest enrollment, 1,300 employees enrolled, 3,200 members. And you see that expected loss ratio on that top right drops quite significantly down to that 85%. So that's even lower than your total plan look where it was at 96 or 98%. So this plan is subsidizing those more expensive plans. So that plan that we just looked at and saw the 154, because this one is well under, it's helping subsidize that higher cost plan. And this again, like Vanessa said, is normal to see a split between your higher utilizers navigating towards that premier plan and then your less utilizers who don't utilize the plan quite as often go towards those plans that are a little bit cheaper. And lastly, looking at page 10, you have the smallest portion of employees on your high deductible plan. So this is going to be your least rich plan and your lowest loss ratio as well. So 77% shows up on that plan just because of, again, not using a lot of high utilizers and a small enrollment population that is occurring on this plan. Moving on to page 11. So moving a little bit away from just the financials, we wanted to show you a little bit more of utilization. So why is your cost going up so much? Especially the trends have been increasing quite a bit in 2025. So this summary is put together just to illustrate those top drivers. So one of the main ones that we are seeing across all industries is RX trend, particularly weight loss medication. Your weight loss medication was 11.2% of your total RX spend year to date through October. So $1.8 million of your just RX spend was alone tied to those weight loss drugs. So that is a huge driver and a huge increase that we've seen compared to the prior years, looking back at 2024 going into 2025. Another driver was the high cost claimants, just your claim costs. So looking at an average claim per member is significantly up from the prior year. So it's a $600 jump. The average was $3,400. And last year it was at $2,800 year to date. So this is just, or suggests inflation, pricing severity, increasing of costs going up and intensity of care, higher utilization was not really the driver of that. Because as you can see, if you drop down to that third bullet point, the number of claims only increased by 5%. So It was a marginable, so that would, tie to the little bit higher cost per claimant, that $600 increase, but it wasn't a huge jump. So it really indicates that that $600 claimant cost increase was driven more by severity inflation rather than utilization. And two settings that we did see a large jump was inpatient hospital and outpatient hospital. Inpatient, we didn't really see a huge jump in admissions. Admissions was really similar, but aggregate core inpatient cost really did drive that increase of the $2 million. So we saw higher costs at that inpatient category than we did in the prior year. And then outpatient hospital claims were primarily driven by injectable drugs. So that was really
Got
what
another
was-
quick question here, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying this a lot. I'm just trying to process all this. I see claims went up 5%. What we budgeted for the budget year, how did we perform against the budget and the dollar budget? Is somebody helping me?
So bear in mind that this is for data through September.
Okay.
So, and Sheena had sent you all some data right after our November monthly financial report. So in mid-December. And what that showed was that we were consistently over budget. And if you recall, we had to come and actually ask you all for additional budget authority in the final quarter of the year. So, but that again is your whole plan. That's not just your medical and RX, that's your vision, your dental and all of that. So we overspent the budget, the original adopted budget. And it was much greater than anticipated. And we did run a fairly significant, almost $6 million deficit in the fund.
Okay,
last year.
that was what I was getting at. The dollar number or percentage increase. $6 million. It's a hefty increase.
It is, and I'll defer to Sheena because I think we're going to get to this later in Vanessa's presentation. But based on all of the data that you're seeing here, there are going to have to be some more conversations for the 2027 budget. We cannot continue on this path without change. You all had heard that there were some tweaks and adjustments made to the 2026 plan that employees had contacted you about with higher rates and higher shares.
Yeah.
But that conversation's not done yet. That doesn't.
Well, I'm reading
the
as we're going, I'm reading the writing on the wall and anticipating that there's a boom coming at the end of the presentation of some sort, but I could remember the dollar amount or the percentage increase, but I knew that we had outpaced our budget by quite a bit.
I'm not going to say there's going to be a boom, but we want to start these conversations early because again, recognizing where we ended the year in 2025, we are continuing on in 2026 already. So we have to have some mitigation strategies in place. And that's why we're having the conversation now and we're having it early.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. The last bullet point I just want to touch on was large claims. Large claimants over 50,000 increased by 2 million. So we also saw a higher utilization of just high cost members. And again, this all we're summarizing, kind of digging into like why the larger increase on the financial side, what was really driving behind that, and these were the drivers that led to those increases. And again, this was just year-to-date data looking at 2025 compared to 2024.
And there are mitigation strategies that we will cover in a minute that are tied to some of these high claims spikes. Hospitalizations you can't do a ton with. You can't introduce centers of excellence to ensure people are going to the highest quality of care. When it comes to outpatient, it was mostly infusion drugs, infusion cancer medications. We are pushing UHC right now to introduce some sort of program that would allow us to move those into an outpatient setting that is inside the home, usually lower cost if that is available to the patient with their academic medications.
Vanessa, do you want me to take page 12 or do you want me to handle it?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, this is a member accumulator by plan. So we wanted to take a look at how many exceeded the deductible and also the out-of-pocket max. So you can see this is just the Premier plan, and that's listed at the very bottom. The Premier plan has a deductible of $750 and the out-of-pocket max is $1,500. And then broken out in the far left category is how much the member cost sharing is. So you can see how many people exceeded the deductible and also the out-of-pocket max. So if you look at the, I guess, third column from the left, where it says subscriber at the top and the number, that's going to be your number of employees in that category. So again, not very many people are exceeding that out-of-pocket max, only 159 in that 1,500 to 2,000 category, and 119 were really close to it. The most are found in that middle range that's highlighted with those red dashed lines. Any questions on this before we move to the next?
No, keep going.
13, same setup as the prior slide. So this is just the base plan. And you can see that deductible shifted to the 1,250 and the out-of-pocket max is 2,500. We had a little bit more in that higher category, but still below $1,000. So most people in those entering those red dashed lines again. And this again was your plan that had the more enrollment. And looking at page 14, your last plan of high deductible, we had even less people exceed the deductible amount, so only 66, and most were in that $250 to $2,000 range.
So what we're looking at here is members out of pocket, right? How much is the employee and or dependent paying for their care? A good majority is under that 250, 500 line, but you have most of the population between where those red dashes are. We consider this when we're looking at benchmarking and plan values, whenever we're talking about ways to control costs or curb costs. We want the county to be educated and have a very transparent look at where the employees are actually spending their money. We did go through a dependent audit in 2025. The county had really good participation in that dependent audit. Very few no responses, so less than 2% of no response. With the termination of the ineligible dependents, we did run a retrospective review of how much those dependents cost the plan. And that's where you see the total estimated savings of $549. That would have been potential cost that would have applied to the plan itself had we not terminated those members.
All right, and looking at page 16 is your benchmarking. So we wanted to illustrate your average benchmark plans. So looking on the far left, your PPO benchmark is listed first in that gray column. So this would be compared to your $1,250 deductible, your base plan, and your premier plan, that $750 deductible. Everything highlighted in red is a little bit higher than the benchmark. So you can see that $1,250 deductible is a little bit higher than $1,000. Everything in green is a little bit below the benchmark. So $750 is actually below that 50 percentile benchmark of $1,000 deductible. And we have all the plan designs listed out below that. And then your high deductible benchmark is going to be a little bit differently because you have just a deductible and out-of-pocket max that applies. And then once those are hit, then your entire co-insurance is covered. The rest of that gray area in that middle section. So we have a different benchmark listed there. And then again, same principle. If it's higher than the benchmark, it's highlighted in red. Below, it means it's better than the benchmark. Down at the bottom, we also listed out contributions. So how much the employees are paying and families are paying. Total premium is going to be total cost of the plan. And then if there was HSA funding, what those dollar amounts were.
Additional questions? Okay. So next we'll talk about future strategies. I've alluded to this section a couple times. So this is where I will go through ways that we are going to look for cost mitigation and strategies to improve the benefit plan. Our ecosystem within benefits has changed. Having a comprehensive medical, dental, life, disability, vision program isn't the only thing employees are asking for or looking for. And then the cost containment of additional strategies is something that employers are considering. For this section here, we would look at the far right side. So engagement platforms, wellness and incentive coaching, and then digital therapeutics. Those are the categories that I will present on today. On page 19, let's talk about trend. This goes back to the question about budget and having these conversations early and often. So the 2025 case studies for projections of 2026 and 2027 costs are projecting that year-over-year trend is going to be between 8 and 10%. meaning in 2026, it will cost X. In 2027, it's projected to cost 8 to 10% more from a service perspective. That is up. It was at 7 to 9% last year. So that trend line is going up. On the medical side, a lot of that has to do with provider consolidation. The hospital systems are taking over the smaller hospitals, making their negotiation power even higher. Large claims, you're seeing large claims affect the renewal right now, and those will continue to happen because therapies do cost more and will continue to cost more. Larger claims along with cancer. So we're seeing a lot more cancer. That doesn't mean it's negative. We're catching cancer earlier, which is positive, but we are seeing a lot more cancer treatment. There will be strategies long-term that we can implement, but they're in the beginning phases from a control mechanism in cancer. From a prescription drug perspective, specialty drugs are high-cost drugs, usually over $1,000. Those are driving costs. We'll talk about a strategy to mitigate that. And then gene therapies. So gene therapies are curative in nature, typically, usually one time and you're done, but they range around $2.3 million per therapy. So those things are driving that trend line up and making it be a little bit higher than last year. Something I've mentioned is Surest. So this is an introduction of a cost transparency buying experience for your members. So this plan would utilize the existing network that the plan uses, so no loss of doctors. What it does is create a buying experience for the health plan. So a member's experience is going onto the app, searching for the service that they're having, and then transparently seeing the cost of that service. It is a copay structured benefit. So there's no questions about, well, my deductible costs X dollars. I won't know until I get my explanation of benefits. It's more upfront. The members can price the services themselves, and they know exactly what they're going to pay at time of service. So it introduces transparency. It also introduces a cost-saving metric. So it is built on the network, but they're going to rely on high-quality, low-cost providers, and they're going to make those providers lower cost to the employee. So if you jump to page 22, I did just quick checks of a couple things. So let's say I'm having an MRI in Wichita, Kansas. You'll see the providers pop up. Kansas Medical Center is the lowest cost provider for that service at $250 to the employee. Rock Regional Hospital would be $375. So it is used to be. I did this in December, so. And then knee replacement is same example. Kansas Surgery and Recovery Center is $250 to the member. If they went to Kansas Joint and Spine, it's $850. So it's not taking away their choice or their ability to see who they would like to see. It's just driving them toward those more effective cost providers and allowing them to transparently see how much cost they're going to have out of pocket. Okay. Next is weight loss coaching. So the cost of weight loss medications has increased because it was $0 last year. So in 2025, we did see a utilization of about 12% of your total drug spent on weight loss medications. What we'd like to do is introduce cost mitigation strategies to make those medications more effective. And so Real Appeal is a program through UHC. What it does is it introduces a coaching option for members that are taking weight loss medications. They have to engage with the coach monthly to get those medications. And again, they'll focus on on weight loss strategies like nutrition and exercise outside of the efficacy of the medication. So this is a recommendation that should be considered for 2027. And then the final strategy that we've pursued and we're continuing to evaluate is international sourcing. Drugs are sourced from tier 1 countries, so Canada, UK, New Zealand, and Australia at a much lower rate than what the cost is in the United States. That simple. This is an analysis that we did for the county. On the blue section, it's what you're actually paying currently. And then the green is the net plan savings. So you'll see at the very bottom, the potential savings for just sourcing the medications differently is $3.9 million. Now, this would be a voluntary program. If a member chooses to not participate, they can choose to not participate. We typically see voluntary utilization between 40 and 60% in the program, and 40% participation would be about 1.5 million in savings, potential savings. The members are incentivized through a $0 cost on their end to take the medications and have that sourced differently. This was a consideration for 2026. At the time of decision, the tariffs were still kind of up in the air and what was going to happen with tariffs. And so the county decided to pause for 2026, but will be consideration for 2027. And that gets us supplemental materials. Huh?
The formal.
Yes.
Okay.
I would love to understand a little bit more about the cost. I mean, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, it feels like $6 million over budget. That's almost a mill of property tax over budget on the health plan. I mean, this is just a lot of trying to understand. I appreciate some of the cost reductive strategies. I do think that would likely be beneficial, but is there anything else that we're not thinking of that can we glean from some other organizations that are doing some things that might be helpful for us to implement or discuss or?
So I believe that's conversations that we're having now. There's a lot of things that are out of our control, because we want to also think of the member too, what is affordable to them. And we don't want to make things so costly that they avoid care, because you can see then that has another ripple effect. But there are things that are within our control. And I know we've talked about it a lot, but weight loss medications, that was one thing that our employees told us very loud and clear that they wanted, but we realized that with almost a 12% increase on our prescriptions, we have to do something to help cost share that out. So we will look into those strategies. One of the slides that we talked about the utilization is you can see that our premier plan does cost us the most every month, and we're supplementing those claims through the other plans. So we have to find a way to adjust that out. We don't want people to just automatically choose a plan because it looks to be the best. We really want them to meet their need as well. And so we do have a lot of employees who are not high users of insurance. And so to have them on the high plan just really doesn't make sense. So we need to do a lot of education to employees as well to help them understand that they're getting the same benefit, but there might just be a different cost involved with it overall.
Thank you, Chairman. You may have covered some of this, but I'm not sure I'm seeing it right now. Looks like the different plans cost the employer different amounts.
Mhm.
I guess I'm just wondering, why do we do it that way? Why don't we have a fixed cost to the employer? They can pick what they want. If the cost of the plan is less expensive than the employee benefits, if they want to pick a more expensive plan, then they have to cover the additional cost. Why are we not just giving them a fixed cost benefit?
So like a defined contribution where you're saying, we'll give you X amount of dollars and you can spend them how you want.
And again, I'll argue again, the high deductible plan and the way this is structured, I don't think people are going to be as interested in that, but if it was structured the way I just hinted at, it seems like people that are fairly healthy, that don't seem to visit the doctor very often, they would prefer to take most of that benefit and put that into a health savings account because it's to their benefit. You know, if we say, I mean, for example, looking at all this data here, what's the average cost for all the plans for all of the employees? What's the average cost per employee total?
That's on page 7. From a claims perspective, the per employee per month for all plans is 1.1335. $1,335
Per month,
per employee per month.
per employee per month.
Mhm.
Okay. And so what is that? So what is that per year then?
I don't have my calculator. Oh, yeah, the total net cost is the 33 million.
For how many employees?
2,491.
And so if I do the math, what's the cost per employee?
You'll have to add the fixed cost to the total net claims.
Never mind.
I don't have my calculator with me, sorry.
Okay, that's 13,347. Does that sound about right? And the high deductible plan right now costs the employee how much?
For a single employee, it costs $10.38 per paycheck. Roughly $20 a month
From an employee.
from the employee. Yes.
What's it cost for the employer? This is on this sheet, this page 7 is employer's costs.
So
That's
you
on
also
page
have a
9
book,
or page
um,
10.
in your handout. It's on page 20 of your book. The employer cost is $338. And the total cost is $348. And that's for employee only on a high deductible plan.
It's a loose leaf at the back.
Yeah. And that's on page 20.
Thank you, Sheena.
20, yeah.
I'll just say once again, I don't know if I agree with how this is structured. I think that some companies out there, they define what the benefit value is for the employee, and they can shop for a plan that's more to what they're interested in. They're willing to pay the additional costs or accept the savings, and they put that into an HSA. I mean, there ought to be a plan that is essentially free to the employee. The HSA would take the savings for the high deductible plan and put that into a savings account, which is portable, and the employee owns it. So they take it with them when they leave the company. So there's a benefit to them to not go to the doctor all the time. They take more responsibility for their own health.
Yep.
And there again, the benefit, we would still require, if you will, annual well checks and that type of thing for them to be eligible to receive the funds. But that's the structure I would like to see us explore.
Okay.
I don't see there's actually a benefit in this case for the employee to pick that plan because it's not structured that way.
Okay.
Is that making sense?
Absolutely.
And I'll just say this is like the 5th or 6th year I brought this up. I don't know why. I don't know what we have to do to get this idea available to the employees. If they're very healthy employees, they take good care of themselves. And again, that coupled with long-term and short-term care insurance, which I guess we're not talking about, that's a different benefit. But if you have long-term, short-term care insurance, it takes care of, an accident or some large scale issue. There are some benefits to those types of policies. For example, your sick leave will run out. If you use it, it will run out, but a long-term care insurance will be for the rest of your life. There's a benefit to that. And we're not really talking about that. It's fairly inexpensive insurance. And again, if you're going to do a high deductible plan, your out of pocket maximum per year is higher, but you draw that from your HSA. And so there's still a benefit. I mean, I'm aging, so I've been to the hospital a few times in my lifetime recently, but if I had gone back 3 years ago, I never have been to the hospital. I've never broke a bone. I've never been admitted for anything. If I was a 25-year-old employee, I'd be like saying the HSA and the high deductible plan would be what I would want to do because I would walk away from that plan with a huge amount of money in an account that I own. It's my money. And that money draws insurance and draws interest, and it is portable, and it belongs to the employee. So I think we need to take a look at that.
Yeah.
To me, the way this is structured, I don't see why anybody would necessarily pick that plan. Thank you.
Absolutely. Contributions is something that we consider on an annual basis at every renewal, and we can review that option and the cost tied to that with our contribution analysis that we will work with the HR team on. Heard.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, Dr. Bro couldn't make it today, so we're going to schedule him for 221. So Tanya, you want to go? Or
I'm gonna turn it over to Tom, who's gonna. We talked about it last Friday, and I think this is regarding the issue paper on the 3% cap, so.
Let me say a few things as we get started here. So one of my questions, which again is not in the testimony that I've written here, but I need to add a paragraph. And from my understanding, the way that Senate Concurrent Resolution 1616 works is it resets property values back to 2022. I don't know if in 2027 our budget would be reflective of a 3% increase above the 2022 numbers, or if those numbers apply to 2027. I don't know how they're planning to transition, but let's just let me make a couple of assumptions here just to make a point. And I mentioned this last week briefly, but I didn't realize how bad this was. Let me tell you the rest of the story here. If this S values were set back to 2022, and if we decided we needed 4% tax levy increase over 2026's budget, so going into 2027, we need a 4% increase in the tax levy. Following so far, so we're 2022 values and 2026's budget plus 4% for the 2027 budget cycle. With those two assumptions, we would need to do one of two things, or a combination of these two things. We would either need to raise the mill levy by 9.096 mils. Say that again. We'd have to raise the mill levy by 9.096 mils, or we'd have to cut $45,356,151 out of the budget. Your choice. Does anybody think we're going to cut $45 million out of this budget? I was talking to someone this morning at coffee. They said, well, and there's another discussion needs to happen today, and I'll get to that at some point, but you know, if we think we can cut $45 million out of the budget, why don't we do that now? We don't need them to get us to do this. If we're wasting $45 million in the budget, let's cut that now. We don't need them to tell us to do it. Or if we're saying that money is truly necessary, then do we really have a choice to do anything but raise the mill levy? So it's not in the testimony I've written for you today yet, but let me just make this point that for Sedgwick County, if those two assumptions are on the front end of this, we're talking over a 9 mil increase. So what you're doing then is you're capping assessment rates to some crazy number in our past, and you're largely increasing the mill levy rate. Who does that hurt and who does that help? Well, let me get into that next. So I've given you a couple of sheets here, and there's one about sales taxes. I'll get to that in a few minutes. I've given you guys an executive brief and a case study using Sedgwick County data. I want to say thank you to Deanna. She provided the data to me on Friday. So I spent some time this weekend doing some of this analysis. And I apologize, it's not perfect. I'm willing to take some comments today to make this better. And hopefully by tomorrow, I can take your comments and I can massage them into this. And we maybe can approve something to go to the legislature tomorrow during the BOCC meeting. But let me just walk you through this. Look at the executive letter. It starts out, there's a brief at the beginning, explains the very second paragraph there explains, well, first paragraph is talking about there's more than 161,000 residential properties were used. This is actual data from Sedgwick County between 2022 and 2025. I'm using actual data. I had to remove about 7,000 properties for a couple of reasons, because it was apparent that in that time frame they either built the house or the house was burned down or something happened. In other words, we started out, let's say, $10,000 value property and ended up at $500,000 property. Well, something obviously didn't. That's not just assessment value increase. That's that they built a building. Okay, so I took that property off the table for the purposes of trying to figure out what would happen. So I looked at the properties that were left over that had values in 22, 23, 24, 25 in those 4 years. I had remaining 161,000 properties. And again, we will remind us all that the Constitution does require uniform and equal treatment of taxation. That's within a classification. It doesn't mean that commercial and residential have to be the same assessment rate. It just means within the commercial classification or within residential classification or whatever, the properties within those classifications are treated equally and uniform. Fair and consistent, if you will. I like those words. So you go down to the third paragraph. One thing that's obvious in this data is there is a redistribution of the tax burden. I think you need to understand that we're not just giving the guys with the spikes tax relief. You're actually moving the tax burden to people who don't have assessed value growth as much. I'm still doing some more analysis on this, but it seems to be not tied to the 3% number, but tied to the average assessed value increase. And I think that's interesting. So in other words, if you have a 5% increase in your market value versus someone else that had a 8% increase in the market value, they're going to be treated differently under this policy. But the guy that has a 5% market value, he still has a tax, even though he's capped at 3%, he still has a tax increase. So I'll get to that in a minute. So this is a letter, and it is to the legislature. I wanted to let them know that, number one, during the three days of public hearings last week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, these 2 points did not come up. They did make the point that there is a shifting of tax burden from one classification to another, which also does happen. But that wasn't the point I was making here. My point was that within a classification, there's a shifting of tax burden from one property owner to the other in the same classification. That was not stated during the public hearing last week. He goes on, it does not cap the mill levy. It allows us to change the mill levy as needed to fund government. But if we, as we increase the mill levy, this redistribution gets more extreme. I'll just say that. And I flip the page over. One of the other problems I think with this, which again, top of page of the executive letter, is it changes it so that everybody within that classification has a different assessment rate. It's supposed to be consistent at 11.5% for residential, for example, 25% for commercial. But within the classification, everyone gets a different assessment rate. I think that alone should shut this down. I talked to KAC last Friday. I brought this up during the call, and they said they had counties that were in favor of the 3% cap. They were in favor of SCR 1616. And because of that, the KAC went neutral. I'm speechless. I don't know what the world they're doing, because they don't represent common sense in this case. This is not common sense. There are 5 takeaways in this summary. It does not guarantee lower property taxes. It creates non-uniform assessment rates, shifts the burden from those who can least afford them, allows tax levy increases to offset capped assessments, and the risks are disproportionately burdening modest and slower growing properties. Let me just say lower income homes. Okay, so that's a summary. If you want to get into the details, there's 2 levels you can get into. There's a 5-page handout. You want to get in further, there's a link at the back of that. They takes you to all of the data. You can see the math if you want to. But there's 2 scenarios laid out here. Let me just go to page 2. In the middle of the page, it talks about scenario 1. And if you go to your chart on the back page, that would be the brown column through, there's a brown, blue, orange, and 2 more blue columns. All that is scenario 1. I need to label that. I understand that. Scenario 1 is those columns. Scenario 2 are the 4 columns to the right. But I want to make a point here, that is, on either one of these scenarios, it doesn't matter which one. Scenario 1, we are using the same. We looked at the 2026 budget. We passed a 27.765, I think it is. 27.765 mill levy is our current rate.
That's the
generated
technically assessed rate, yeah.
Okay, and on these properties, 161 residential properties, that generates $114 million in property tax. So using that number as a need, we're saying we need $114 million of property tax out of these 161,000 properties. If you do that, rather than lowering the mill levy by the one, what is it? Rather than lowering the mill levy by, it's actually in my narrative here. So rather than lowering the mill levy by 1.134 mils, we have to increase the mill levy by 0.292 mils.
And is
So-
this just residential, or is this?
That's just residential. these 161,000 homes. To get back to the $114 million property tax, rather than that reduction in the mill levy, we have to actually increase the mill levy by 0.292. So the mill levy would have gone down, but now it has to go up to generate the same dollars we needed for fund 2026. Okay. The other way you could have, and by the way, in doing that, 83,000 properties pay more taxes than they would have under current law. And 78,000 properties have a tax cut. So understand, we're not really solving the problem here. We're shifting who pays. 83,000 people have a tax increase with this proposal versus current law. You say, well, let's take a more conservative approach to this. Let me make a point here. When you average a 3% cap and another 3% cap, then also there's a property here that only went up 2%. Okay, the average of all those properties is not 3%. It's less than 3%. So you do this to all these properties based on actual data. These 161,000 properties, the average assessed value increase for all the properties collectively for the jurisdiction is 2.4%. That's the increase, not 3%. Remember, we had an 8.6% increase in assessed value last year. It captured 4.29%. We returned back to the taxpayers 4.3%. So we wanted 4.29% tax levy increase, but the assessed value increase for this jurisdiction for Sedgwick County, using actual data with a 3% cap, the assessed value increase now goes down to 2.4%. Let's just say for a second we want to capture that 2.4%. But capture that. So what do? You use the 2024 mill levy rate of 28.701. When you do that, you think, well, I've solved the problem. Now no one should have a tax increase. Guess what? You're wrong. Because in this scenario, this is scenario number 2. It's on the right side of your sheet. 68,246 properties have a tax increase, even taking this more conservative approach. And 93,000 have a tax decrease. So again, you've shifted it more towards people to have more tax decreases, but you still have 68,000 people, 68,000 properties out of 161,000 have a tax increase, even if you take this conservative approach. That makes sense. And in doing that, again, the assessed value, look on the chart on the left-hand side, you'll see the assessment rate for these properties. There's 3 there towards the bottom. They're 11.5. Why are those 11.5? Because they didn't hit the cap. But you see, they would have had a $46 tax, that green over to the right. So on the left-hand side, you see the red column, 11.5% is their assessment rate. They would have had a decrease in their tax levy of $46. But under the new law, under scenario 1, they have an increase of $50. I'm sorry, relevant to that, it would be $50.96, or on scenario 2, $40.53. In either case, it's either it is a tax increase. That's why it's red on both those columns. So I just want to say this. I don't think there's anybody in Topeka that understands the math of this. And I hope the executive letter highlights the truth. I don't know if anyone's going to go through the 5-page document, understand this. And if they really want to, they could. If they want to go to that link, they can see all of the data for 161,000 properties on that link. My question is the executive summary enough to make the arguments that need to be made? The executive brief, I should say. And I got one more point to make after all of this. I got one more thing to talk about. You guys are too quiet. We need some feedback. I want to adopt something tomorrow to send it to the senators. What are we thinking here? Or send it to the legislature. Again, 2 points were not covered by the 3-day hearing. We did not talk about individual property assessment rates. And did not talk about the shifting of tax burden from one property to the other within the same classification. They did not talk about either one of those 2 things. Please.
On this case study, you have key findings conclusion and you write it out very clearly, 1-5. Do you think that is captured here in your second page where you say in summary, the analysis demonstrates that as 16, and then you have the 5 points. Do you think that those both, because I feel like the case study, you define it clearly here, but do you think it defines it in the executive summary as such. You understand what I'm saying? I feel like the case study clearly identifies it. You feel like it does the same on your executive summary.
You know, I could put the key findings that are on page 1 of that 5-page document and add them more towards the front of or maybe at the bottom of the executive brief at the top of the page on page 1 there. And then I can start the letter down below. Again, I don't want them to read this and say, there's a lot of words on this paper. I just want to read the very first thing and I'll throw it away. I want to catch their attention at the very beginning.
Well,
So
and
that,
that's
you're right.
because if you recall, Jason said you want to start out with an opening statement. And then the other thing he said, and one thing to consider too, is because this is coming from Sedgwick County Commission, he wanted us to either state if we are opposing and then in the opening statement, and then say, here's the facts based on what we know of SCR or SCR 1616, here's the facts. Or if we want to say we're neutral and here's the facts on SCR 1616. So I think that the commissioner are going to have to decide whether they're going to be neutral on this and here's the facts, or if they're going to be.
Well, if you all like that 9 mil increase, we could be in favor. I don't know why how do we possibly ever get to neutral on this? I don't see that that's any better. I would like to say that we should be opposed. It doesn't make, their proposal does not work.
Yeah, I would say, Commissioner Howell, thank you first for the analysis and all the work you've done on this. I do think that I think there's a lack of awareness of the impact. If the impetus of what they want to do at the state is to curb property tax increases, this is not the method that accomplishes that. I would agree also with you that I think what some people would say is, well, just cut spending. You got to cut spending. You got to cut spending. I think when you quantify how much spending or how many expenditures that we would have to reduce, this is not cutting frivolous spending. This is cutting core service programming. This is cutting public safety. So I don't know what I am loudly in favor of opposition to the bill. And I think that'd be the most appropriate response. I want to try to get to our South Central delegation in a more efficient way so they understand this and the impact. I think we have a reputation with our delegation that this isn't a tax and spend commission or tax and spend county. I think that there's some credibility that I would even say, I mean, these conversations around caps are not offensive to me, but this is just the wrong plan. This is not the plan that accomplishes what they want to do. And so however we can manage that in that conversation, Commissioner, I think we've got to get to the South Central delegation and present this as efficiently and effectively. The lack of constitutionality piece of it, but the impact, and that this really doesn't solve the problem they're trying to solve. But I'm absolutely in favor of opposition to the bill.
I guess some of my concerns, as well as I was reading through the KAC briefing, is where they want to lock in property values where, generally I thought, well, if we did the 3%, then when the property sells, we can get up to the real value, but it doesn't do that. It remains there. Well, I mean, eventually this is just going to crack wide open, and we're not going to have an assessment value near what the actual value of the property is.
So imagine the assessment values are not anywhere near 11.5%. Imagine they're 2 or 3%. Well, the mill levy is going to be, 300 or something. I mean, it's X times Y equals Z. I can still find a Z that funds government, but if one factor goes down to 1/10 of what it is today, we just need to take the other factor times 10. Still the same math. Again, so they're just playing with the formula. This is not solving a problem here. Let me their frustration is there is a narrative out there by some people that the appraisal process is hugely wrong on some properties. And I agree with them. We've talked about this before. We need to address that by trying to not let that happen. And if there is an error, we need to walk alongside that taxpayer and get it fixed. And I've even talked about restitution potential. There's a bill introduced last week that actually conceives the idea of restitution for overpayment of taxes for a property that was overvalued. I'm not really against having that discussion. We talked to Deanna during her interview process. We talked about what happens if someone is statistically an outlier from the norms. You might look at the bell curve of changes and say, if someone's on the low end of that bell curve, I would probably not worry about them too much. But if they're on the high end of the bell curve and they have exceeded the three standard deviations, if you will, of the bell curve on the right-hand side, we need to have a process by which we would automatically go and look at that up and find out what's wrong, assuming there's a problem. That should be law. We should automatically do that by law. We should have a responsibility to go and verify the change because it appears there may be something incorrect there. We talked about the taxpayer's advocate. There's a number of things we can do to address this problem, but their idea is creating so many problems. It doesn't, and if they think by lowering the assessment down to some, man, if you want to go nuts here, make it back to 50 years ago. I don't care. Pick a number. It doesn't matter. We just have to change the mill levy to create the same dollars we need to fund government. And if they think we're that wasteful, and I ask people all the time, if we're wasteful, we should get rid of the waste today. I don't need them to tell us to get rid of the waste. There's something they're doing that causes us to suddenly say, "Oh, now we should get rid of some waste." No, we're always there all the time. No one tolerates waste. So if we're funding the things that are expected and demanded by the people we serve, the mill levy is going to be what the mill levy is going to be. We have to be efficient and effective and conservative and fund the services people expect. And guess what? It is what it is. So we can play math games all day long. This doesn't solve any problems at all. I think they need to get back to the real problem here. So we have a system that actually entertains errors, that we need to address those errors. And again, there ought to be better ways of doing that. But this stops the spikes, but it actually has unintended consequences of violating the Constitution and creating an increased tax burden for people who can least afford it. How in the world can they possibly go forward? And the roll out of this thing, setting things back to 2022. I can't even imagine a 9 mil increase. What was it? What was it? What county was it? They just lost 3 to 5 commissioners because what was the mill increase? 7 mills? Oh, 13. Well, nevertheless, at the end of the day, I don't think there's any possible way that they're going to put this on us to have to raise the mill levy by 9 mills. We need to be opposed, and we need to speak to it. I think that we have local government day next Wednesday. Am I right about that?
We have a reception in Topeka with the South Central delegation.
Well, it's called local government day. There's going to be activities all day long. So we could go up there in the morning and do our best to meet up with people. In the evening, we probably need to do our best to have some of these conversations to people to explain some of this. I've been following this thing pretty closely. Just to throw out there, the fact that KCCA, and LKM came out neutral on this is shocking to me. Farm Bureau is against it. The realtors were against it. I think they still are. The builders are against it. The Kansas Livestock Association is against it, and others, because they understand it's shifting this to agricultural. I don't know that they understand the thing I'm bringing up today. Again, these 2 points weren't even articulated by anybody. And I think when you realize these are two truths, this bill should be dead. It shouldn't even leave the Senate committee, frankly, because I don't know how you jump over these two problems. It's that bad. I want to fix property taxes, but this is not the way to do it. I have one more thing I want to share with you, which I don't know if you want to finish talking. I can make those changes that Tanya was suggesting here. I want to present this again tomorrow. I'd like to see this formally adopted so we can hand it to them and to ask Jason to please get this distributed to people. Tanya, would you work with me today to clean this up a little bit? I think we're getting close. I need some help getting it maybe rearranged a little bit.
And I think the discussion with Jason Watkins was to send it to the entire group, not the South Central delegation, to the whole group is what his.
I was trying to get face to face with South Central delegation the best we can. Those are the relationships we personally have. So, yeah, go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you. And thanks again, Jim, for your work on this. So is a theory that, dear legislator, that's the basis of the letter that we would adopt, where it says, dear legislator?
I would give them the whole thing. I want them to see the top, what is this about? Then there's a letter written to them.
All right. So the letter, right. I see. So this would be the attached information.
Right. This is two documents that are attached. And hopefully they'll look at this one and they may look at the second one with more
What I'm
details.
questioning is that what's the executive brief? Why is that? what's the letter going to start with? Is it going to start with executive brief or is it going to start with dear legislator?
No, start with executive brief. I wanted them to see it's like when you read a study, sometimes you go to the very last page and say, what's the conclusion of the study? That's why even on this case study paper, I brought the key findings to the front.
Fine.
Again, so it's the conclusion, but it's rather than put it on the back page, I put it towards the front because I want them to, if they don't only see page one, I want them to make sure they see that piece because that's the part that really matters.
This was what Watkins coached, right? When you visit with him,
Jason,
this
that's
format.
what Watkins said. He's happy with this.
Jason
format.
hasn't seen this yet. Jason said, bring a white paper. The suggestion was have an opening statement that provides where we're at on this, if we're neutral, if we're opposing, and then just provide, here's the facts on the 3% cap. So to me, you know, what I say to Commissioner Howell is what I really liked was the key findings. To me, that's our opening statement. And then whether or not we're neutral or we're opposing on this.
I anticipate I would probably rearrange this letter here. I still think having this format where if all you do is read the very first thing on the first page, you're telling what they really need to see. And that's why that's at the very, I'm trying to put that at the very top. So maybe I'll add this key findings at the very top of the first page. Simply just say, there's a tax analysis on Sedgwick County. Here's the key findings.
Key findings.
Relevant to 1616.
Key findings meaning the bullets on the backside.
Well, I was going to actually pull them from page one of the other document. It says key findings conclusion.
I echo a little bit of what Ryan said. I'm in agreement. Did Jason say that we ought to also suggest alternatives or just say we're against it? And here's why.
I mean, he just suggested the white paper have the fact findings and then come in with an open statement, basically saying if we're neutral, if we.
So would the committee look at this and say, or any legislator say, well, that's now you've just shot this down, maybe justified, but what is your solution? What did he say?
So we've not agreed as a commission. So this is a very personal for me. And I think Jeff Bubaugh probably agrees on most of this, maybe not all of it, but I have a list of 16 things we can do to address property taxes in the state of Kansas. Some of it is within our own power today. We just need to go do it. Some of it's going to require legislative changes. And again, we have a list of 16 things we think we can change. And we may not totally agree on all 16 things. But my point is, and I've been using that phrase a lot because I want them to ask, well, what would you do to fix property taxes? I think we have a lot of ideas on what we would do. I'd like to encourage them to know there are some great ideas out there. We should at least have a chance to present them and they can.
Examples of consideration or something.
Yeah. I mean,
would that be of value to add into this document? Say,
can I state it something like that there, some of the commissioners work together and we have up to right now, 16 distinct things we don't completely necessarily agree on as a platform, but these ideas are out there and they're worthy of discussion. And again, if you want to address property taxes in the state of Kansas, we would encourage them to explore some of these ideas, something like that.
I really trust, historically, especially the last couple of years, I really trust Jason's guidance on how to navigate an incredibly complicated thing through the process. So,
in reality, there's three things. One, we're going to wordsmith this today. Two, you guys are going to vote on something tomorrow. And then three, we have the South Central delegation next Wednesday in the afternoon, which I think is going to take the bulk of our time just to getting them to understand this. I don't know that we have time for solutions. We could say there are solutions that we would gladly be part of recommending, but I don't know if we can get to that by next Wednesday.
I think the other thing too is just the expediency of how fast this is moving on the Senate side. If you look at today's newsletter, I mean, it already talks about Senator Karen Tyson's already going to work on that one. So it's just trying to get this,
I understand that if we want to pause on suggestions.
Right. Get this thing killed and then figure out.
I just asked him. If I was a senator or whatever, I'd be asking that question. Thanks for blowing it up. Now, what do you think? Well, yeah, we'll get back to you.
I've pushed all along for accurate assessments, but this creates an artificial guardrail that just separates us, and it's just not a long-term solution.
I have one more thing to chat about. So last week, Nick Hoheisel introduced legislation that makes it an option for local government to not levy their local sales tax on food. And I reflect on it. A few years ago, I believe it was Ty Masterson introduced a bill that would have made this a mandate. In other words, the state sales tax on food was being removed. And at the same time, they were going to force local governments to do the same. So there would be no sales tax on food. I testified against that bill for a couple of reasons. And he's probably still mad at me about that. But one of the reasons I testified against that was people voted for sales tax, for property tax relief. I asked a rhetorical question that I want them to think about this, but what is the percentage of revenue that comes from sales tax on food? I think some of us might know that. Lindsay, see if you and I agree. 17%. 17%. So I don't know if we could even do this with a countywide sales tax if we wanted to, without going back for a vote, because the mandate was a sales tax on everything. It didn't say to make exemptions. So I don't know if you wanted to even entertain the idea, but if you do want to entertain the idea, just to throw this out there, we received, Lindsay just sent out literally a week or so ago, the increase in sales tax. I should have updated the chart here. I didn't have time. So what you have in front of you is a year old, but let me give you some new numbers. The 2025 dollars from countywide sales tax is now $41,128,145. And if you look at 17% of that, that would be $6,991,784. Or based on this, again, 1 mil is equal to $7.546 million. That's equivalent to 0.92 mils. So right now we have a 5.184 mil levy reduction. That was last year's numbers based on the dollars per mil and the revenue from the sales tax to Sedgwick County. So we're not levying 5.1 mils because of the sales tax. To do the same services that we do today, if it wasn't for the sales tax, we would have to levy 5.184 mils more. If you wanted to get rid of sales tax on food, you can add basically another mil to that. Or add a mil to our current mil levy to make up the revenue. Of course, our choice is to cut services. If you want to go cut, $7 million worth of services, we can do that. I guess my question would be, why don't we do that now? If we really want to cut government to the bone, why don't we go ahead and cut the $7 million out of the budget today? Or if you don't think we should do that, then our choice is when you lower the sales tax on food, you have to make it up with a property tax increase. Let's talk about Wichita for just a minute. Wichita last year, according to the new numbers, they received $85,252,780. Of that, 17% would be $14,492,972. That is equivalent to 2.669 mils. So if they wanted to have us remove the sales tax on food, they would have to either cut their budget by nearly $15 million or raise their mill levy by 2 3/4 mils. I don't know that that's what they want to do. By the way, the proposal for $850 million for 7 years on a 1% sales tax, they give up $144 million right off the bat. My question would be, what of those things they're planning to fund out of the $850 million will not get funded because they lose $150 million worth of revenue? My guess is, well, I could speculate what that might be, but something's not going to get funded. I mean, that's more money than that's what Second Light would be, what, 150 million? Property taxes, 150 million? Something's not going to get funded. So I don't know if, by the way, one more thing about this, there is what's called a low income food programs, supplemental nutrition assistance program or SNAP, or temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, or Women, Infant, and Children's Program, WIC. All three of those programs do not charge sales tax on food. They're tax exempt. So what you're doing is you're giving a tax reduction for people who are not necessarily on a low income food program. You're giving them a reduction on their food sales and increasing their property taxes. If the Sedgwick County did this, again, not even talking about the 1% sales taxes, which is proposed right now, but if we did this with our existing 1% countywide sales tax, to make that up between the city and the county, we'd have to increase our levy and they'd have to increase their levy a total of 3.589 mils. So again, 17% reduction in sales tax. That's $1 less tax on $100 worth of spending. But to make that up, you have to increase your property tax funds by 3.589 mils. By the way, who does that hurt more than anybody? Does it hurt the poor people or the rich people? Well, poor people actually get food without paying sales tax. But this 3.589 mils will be borne in rent and in housing costs. So the people who can least afford it will in fact have to pay that 3.589 mils on their housing. So if you're trying to help people who are low income, why would you take a 1% sales tax and increase their property tax or housing costs? Why would you do that? So again, I think that when someone says, and I've heard this numerous times in the last week, there's a proposal to remove the sales tax on food, and there's an immediate buy-in by everyone saying, that's a great idea, we should do that. But no one's talking about the flip side of that. What's that do to the rest of the budget? These two conversations have to be coupled. Can't do one without talking about the other. I can tell you right now, if this bill passes, we're going to be under a lot of pressure to actually take the option if we can legally do so. And what that will do is Derby will lose, I've had it all written down here, but Derby loses a lot. Wichita loses nearly $15 million. And I think the result of this is, we add it all up, we're talking about a 3.5 mil levy increase to cover the costs. Unless, of course, you want to cut services. But to cut services collectively, we'd have to see a $25 million reduction in services countywide. Most of that being in Wichita and Sedgwick County. I just want to say this conversation is developing and everyone thinks this is a great idea. I want people to understand there's another side of this story. I hate taxes. I get it. But I want to fund services. I want to do it in a fair manner. This proposal does not solve a problem. It actually shifts the tax burden once again to people who can least afford it. We think you're helping them out, but you're actually hurting them. I think it's a terrible idea. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner, thanks a lot for your comments. And I know we'll be visiting about this tomorrow. So I know we've got an event to get to. So thank you guys very much. And we'll see everybody in the morning at 9 a.m.